17 days into this war, and the single most important military confession of this entire conflict just came out of Iran's own mouth. Not from a Western intelligence report, not from a leaked Pentagon briefing, from Iran's own Revolutionary Guard spokesman speaking on state television to the Iranian people in plain language. Brigadier General Ali Mohammad Naini stood in front of cameras and told the world that the approximately 700 missiles and 3,600 drones that Iran has fired at American and Israeli targets since February 28th were manufactured a decade ago. He said, and this is his direct statement on record, that many of the missiles Iran has produced since the last war in 2025 have not yet been deployed. Let that sit with you for a second. 17 days of warfare, the world watching. Oil markets in chaos. Dubai's airport shut down this morning by a drone strike. No country on earth willing to send warships to help Trump open the Strait of Hormuz. And Iran's military spokesman is telling the world that what we have seen so far is not even close to what Iran actually has. The real arsenal has not moved. The newer, faster, harder to intercept weapons are still sitting in underground bunkers waiting. And nobody in Washington, Tel Aviv, or any of the Gulf capitals has a clear answer for what happens when those weapons finally launch. To understand why this statement is so significant, you have to understand the full military picture of what has happened over the past 17 days, because the numbers tell a story that neither side wants to fully acknowledge in public. According to the Jerusalem Post's detailed analysis of the conflict, Iran entered this war with an estimated 2,500 ballistic missiles, plus an enormous drone inventory. In the first 10 days alone, Iran fired approximately 2,410 ballistic missiles and 3,560 drones, numbers that vastly exceeded everything Iran fired during the entire 12-day war in June 2025. The scale of Iran's opening salvo was staggering, but here is what the data also shows. By day 10 of the conflict, Iran's daily missile launch rate had collapsed by approximately 92% from its peak. On February 28th, the first day of the war, Iran fired around 480 ballistic missiles in a single day. By March 9th, that number had dropped to around 40 per day. The U.S. and Israel pointed to that collapse as proof that their campaign to destroy Iranian missile launchers was working. They said they had neutralized over 60% of Iran's ballistic missile launchers. They called it degradation. They called it victory in progress. But General Naini's statement on Sunday changes the entire interpretation of that data. Because what Iran's own spokesman is now saying is that the missiles being fired and the missiles being destroyed were the old ones. The liquid-fueled, decade-old systems that required 30 to 60 minutes of preparation before launch. Systems that were visible to satellites during fueling. Systems that American and Israeli intelligence had already mapped and targeted. Iran's IRGC deliberately chose to expend older inventory first, while holding its modern, solid-fueled systems in reserve. This was not depletion. This was strategy. And the analytical community that was celebrating the 92% collapse in daily launch rates may have been measuring exactly what Iran wanted them to measure. What makes the distinction between old and new missiles so critical is the difference in how modern missile defense systems handle them. Iran's older liquid-fueled missiles, like the Shahab-3 family, take up to an hour to fuel and prepare. They appear on satellite imagery as stationary targets for an extended window before launch. They give interceptor systems significant lead time. Iran's newer solid-fueled systems, the Khaybar-Sheikhan, the Hajj Qasem, and most critically the Fatah series, are a fundamentally different problem. Solid-fuel missiles require no fueling sequence. They can be transported, set up, and fired in minutes. Some of Iran's most advanced systems, like the Fatah, have been described by Iranian officials as hypersonic, capable of maneuvering during flight to defeat standard intercept calculations. Even if some of those claims are overstated, the basic operational reality is that solid-fueled systems give interceptor batteries far less reaction time. And the IRGC commander of the Aerospace Force made another announcement this week that received almost no coverage in Western media. He said Iran will, from this point forward, only launch missiles carrying warheads weighing over 1 ton. The older missiles Iran has been firing had warheads between 500 and 1,000 kilograms. Iran is now telling its enemies that the next wave carries heavier payloads, more destructive force per impact, and will come from systems that are harder to detect and faster to impossible to intercept. Meanwhile, on the American and Israeli side, the interceptor picture is moving in a deeply uncomfortable direction. Semaphore reported this week that Israel formally notified the United States that it is running critically low on ballistic missile interceptors. This is not a minor logistics problem. Every time an Iranian missile heads toward Tel Aviv or Haifa, Israel fires Patriot or Arrow interceptors to stop it. Each Patriot missile costs around $4 million. Each Arrow interceptor costs significantly more. Israel has been firing these at an extraordinary rate for 17 days. The supply is not unlimited. And now Israel has told Washington directly that the stockpile is under critical pressure at the exact moment Iran's spokesman is announcing that the newer, heavier missiles are coming next. The competition that Arab News described between Iran's missile and drone reserves versus the interceptor stockpiles of Israel and the Gulf states is becoming the central operational question of this entire war. And right now, based on the public statements from both sides, the trajectory of that competition is not obviously moving in America's favor. The broader military picture on day 17 confirms that this war has entered a genuinely new phase. Israel launched a fresh wave of strikes on Tehran this morning. Iran's Mehr news agency reported Iran was responding to what it called hostile targets over Tehran. The Iranian Red Crescent reported that the latest Israeli raids damaged one of its clinics and an aid relief post. In Lebanon, Israel announced limited and targeted ground operations in southern Lebanon, saying it was targeting key Hezbollah strongholds. A bulldozer was clearing debris in Beirut's southern suburbs, following Israeli airstrikes. At least one person was killed in Abu Dhabi after a missile hit a vehicle. Saudi Arabia intercepted 37 drones in its eastern region on Monday. Kuwait detected 14 hostile drones in its airspace over the past 24 hours, destroying 8 of them, with debris from the others causing material damage and injuring 3 members of the Kuwaiti armed forces. Fujairah in the UAE reported a fire in an industrial zone after a drone strike. And this morning, a drone hit near Dubai International Airport, setting a fuel tank on fire and forcing Emirates Airline to suspend all flights. The world's busiest international aviation hub shut down. Hundreds of passengers were evacuated. Flights were diverted. Emirates later announced limited resumption, but with multiple routes canceled for the day. The IEA called the disruption to shipping through the Strait of Hormuz the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. Oil prices responded accordingly. Brent crude climbed to its highest level since July 2022, reaching approximately $106 per barrel. U.S. crude crossed $101 per barrel. U.S. gas prices are now at their highest level since October 2023, with diesel approaching $5 per gallon. The EU's energy ministers held an emergency meeting on Monday to discuss how to address rising energy costs across Europe. The International Energy Agency's 400 million barrel emergency reserve release, the largest in history, has done essentially nothing to bring prices down because the physical problem is not a shortage of oil in the ground. The problem is that 20% of the world's daily oil supply cannot move through the Strait of Hormuz. Every day, approximately 15 million barrels of crude and 5 million barrels of oil products are locked out of the global market. The 400 million barrel reserve would be consumed in approximately 26 days at that rate. The oil market knows this, which is why prices keep rising regardless of what any government announces. And here is where the strategic picture on day 17 becomes genuinely alarming for the Trump administration specifically. Trump spent the first week of this war telling the world he had won. He said there was practically nothing left to bomb. His defense secretary said Iran was badly losing. And now Trump is calling on Britain, France, Germany, Japan, South Korea, and even China to send warships to help open the Strait of Hormuz, a waterway that the United States Navy could not unilaterally force open, despite having the most powerful fleet in the history of warfare. CNN published an analysis on Monday with a headline that asked the obvious question: if Trump already won the Iran war, why does he need foreign ships to help him end it? Trump told the Financial Times in an interview on Sunday that he wants to know China's position on helping reopen Hormuz before his planned summit with Xi Jinping on March 31st. He floated postponing that summit. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was in Paris over the weekend meeting with Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng and said there was no conflict between the U.S. and China over Iran. But the fact that Trump is dangling the Xi summit as leverage to get Chinese ships into the Gulf tells you something very specific about the strategic situation. America does not have enough leverage alone. Iran has successfully turned the Strait of Hormuz into a global hostage. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi spoke directly to this on Sunday in an interview with CBS News. He was asked whether Iran wanted a ceasefire. His answer was unambiguous. He said Iran never asked for a ceasefire, never asked for negotiation, and is prepared to continue the war for as long and as far as necessary. He separately issued a statement on the Strait of Hormuz situation that contained one of the most precise and devastating pieces of diplomatic language of this entire conflict. He said the strait is open but closed to enemies, to those who carried out aggression against Iran and to their allies. Not closed, but closed to enemies. That framing is legally and operationally significant. Iran is not declaring a blockade, which would be a formal act of war under international maritime law. Iran is maintaining selective passage control, allowing through vessels from countries it deems neutral while attacking vessels with any connection to the United States, Israel, or their allies. It is a chokehold without a formal declaration. The domestic political pressure on Trump is also building in ways that the administration cannot simply dismiss. The UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer said on Monday that Britain will not be drawn into a wider war with Iran. He said British efforts to help reopen Hormuz would not be a NATO mission. EU energy ministers are meeting in emergency session. The ExxonMobil, Chevron, and ConocoPhillips chief executives jointly warned the Trump administration this week that the Hormuz disruption is likely to worsen the global energy crisis. 3 of America's biggest oil companies told the President of the United States directly that his war is threatening to break the global energy market, and congressional Democrats are still demanding public hearings on the war's objectives and exit strategy. When a senator who attended a classified briefing told reporters that the one question the administration could not answer was what happens when the bombing stops and Iran rebuilds, that question has still not been answered 17 days later. The Israeli military told CNN this week that it has plans for at least 3 more weeks of airstrikes with thousands of targets still remaining. The IDF spokesperson said Israel is ready in coordination with U.S. allies through at least the Jewish holiday of Passover, roughly 3 weeks away, with deeper plans extending 3 weeks beyond that. 6 weeks minimum, 6 more weeks of oil at over $100 a barrel, 6 more weeks of Dubai airports under drone attack. 6 more weeks of Iranian missiles heading toward Tel Aviv, 6 more weeks of Patriot and Arrow interceptors being fired from a stockpile that Israel itself has described as running critically low. And now 6 more weeks against an Iranian arsenal that their own spokesman has confirmed still contains the newer, heavier, harder to intercept weapons that have not yet been used. Iran has fired 700 missiles and 3,600 drones in 17 days, using its oldest and least capable inventory. Its missile launch rate collapsed by 92%, not because it ran out of weapons, but because its launchers for the old systems were systematically destroyed. The new solid-fueled systems that require only minutes to prepare, that are harder to detect, and that carry heavier warheads are intact and waiting. The IRGC commander announced this week that only missiles with warheads over 1 ton will be fired going forward. Israel is running low on interceptors. Trump cannot get a single ally to publicly commit warships to Hormuz. Oil is above $100 a barrel and rising, and Iran's foreign minister has said the war continues for as long and as far as necessary. Trump says this ends soon. His own defense secretary cannot say how many weeks are left. Israel is planning for 6 more weeks minimum. And Iran's arsenal, the part that actually matters, has not fully entered the fight yet. Day 17. And in many ways, the war that the world has been watching for over 2 weeks may not be the war that is actually coming. Stay locked in, because this conflict is moving faster than any single news cycle can capture, and every development in the next 48 hours matters. Subscribe now, because tomorrow brings a new phase of this war, and you need to understand what is actually happening and why. And tell me in the comments, do you believe Iran is genuinely holding back its best weapons as a strategic reserve? Or is this Iranian information warfare designed to mask how badly their arsenal has actually been depleted?